Foot binding was one of the most extreme and enduringly cruel customs in ancient China. It was a practice that involved tightly binding the feet of young girls, causing permanent deformity and often leading to a lifetime of pain and disability. This custom, which lasted for over 1,000 years, was primarily associated with the upper class and served as a symbol of beauty, status, and social standing. The origins of foot binding can be traced back to the 10th century during the Song dynasty, and it continued to exist until the early 20th century. Despite its barbarity, foot binding was deeply entrenched in Chinese society, and its abolishment required significant social and cultural changes. The practice of foot binding involved the wrapping of young girls' feet with tight bandages to restrict their growth. This process typically began at around the age of 5 or 6, when the bones in the feet were still in the developmental stage. The feet were soaked in warm water to soften the skin, and then meticulously massaged and broken to reshape them. The arches of the feet were forcefully bent, and the toes were pressed downward and tightly wrapped towards the soles, creating the desirable lotus-shaped foot. The bindings were often made of cloth strips or silk and were wound tightly to ensure the deformation of the foot. As time passed, the bindings were regularly adjusted and tightened to maintain the desired shape. The pain inflicted by foot binding was excruciating and lasted throughout a woman's lifetime. The constant pressure on the feet led to broken bones, deformed arches, and stunted growth. Walking became challenging, and women with bound feet were forced to hobble, relying on furniture or the support of others to move around. Foot binding imposed severe limitations on women's mobility and independence, effectively confining them to their households. Additionally, foot binding had long-term health consequences such as chronic foot infections, ulcers, and the risk of tetanus or gangrene. Despite the physical suffering, foot binding persisted due to its association with beauty and cultural ideals of femininity. The origins of foot binding are shrouded in legend and varying accounts. One popular belief is that Emperor Li Yu, during the Southern Tang dynasty, was captivated by the bound feet of his dancer, Yao Nai. Fascinated by its allure, he then ordered the binding of court dancers' feet, leading to the spread of the practice among the nobility. Another theory suggests that foot binding emerged as a way to signify a woman's social status and to differentiate the wealthy from the lower classes who needed to work and perform labor-intensive tasks. Whatever its exact origins, foot binding quickly became a symbol of beauty, refinement, and social hierarchy. The popularity of foot binding increased across different regions and social classes over the centuries. As the influential elite embraced this custom, it gradually spread to the upper class and later seeped into the lower classes as a way to increase marriage prospects for women. Mothers began inflicting foot binding on their daughters as unbound feet were seen as undesirable and considered a drawback when finding a suitable partner. There was a prevailing belief that women with bound feet would acquire more attractive features, including a more delicate gait and the ability to wear dainty shoes. Consequently, foot binding became an indispensable attribute for women seeking social acceptance and upward mobility within the rigid hierarchical structure of Chinese society. The repercussions of foot binding extended beyond the physical pain and societal pressures. It contributed to the perpetuation of restrictive gender roles, further diminishing women's agency and reinforcing patriarchal norms. The process of foot binding required the assistance of other women, such as mothers or experienced foot binders, which fostered a sense of collective conformity and reinforced the values associated with foot binding. This cultural practice represented the subjugation of women and their acceptance of immense suffering to conform to societal expectations of beauty and elegance. Furthermore, foot binding created a stark divide between genders, with women who bound their feet seen as more desirable for marriage while unbound women considered unmarriable and often subjected to social ostracism. In the early 20th century, as China underwent numerous social and political changes, campaigns against foot binding gained momentum. Intellectuals, reformers, and women's rights activists began advocating for the abolition of this harmful practice, highlighting its detrimental effects on women's physical and psychological well-being. These efforts were met with resistance, as foot binding had become deeply ingrained in Chinese culture and was seen as an essential marker of beauty and feminine virtue. However, sustained pressure and educational campaigns gradually led to a decline in foot binding, and it was officially banned in 1912 by the newly established Republic of China. Although the binding of feet ceased, the influence and symbolism of foot binding persisted for many years. Foot binding in ancient China serves as a haunting reminder of the extreme measures societies have taken to uphold rigid beauty standards and societal hierarchies. It inflicted immense pain and suffering on countless women, perpetuating gender inequality and reinforcing oppressive norms. Yet, foot binding also showcased the resilience and tenacity of women who endured the lifelong consequences of this custom. Reflecting on this cruel tradition prompts us to question the ways in which societal expectations continue to impact individuals, particularly women, and the importance of challenging harmful practices to foster a more inclusive and equal society.